Hi, this is David McCann for Elementor 360. Welcome to another 360 tutorial. In this video, I want to look at the dynamic token extension that is part of the dynamic content for Elementor add-on. I've been looking at the dynamic content for Elementor add-on pack, and there are three things that I see right off. The first is that many of the widgets and extensions are unique and very powerful. For example, dynamic users, the ability to load remote content, the ability to create a PDF from a page, advanced custom field widgets, the ability to include a file or PHP, to work with a panoramic photo, and a number of extensions, including the dynamic tag token extension, which is the subject of this video. The second thing I noticed was that because they're very powerful, these are power tools. All of them are not necessarily the simple drag and drop and forget type of widgets you get with most Elementor add-on packs. You need to figure them out and figure out how to configure them. And the documentation isn't always thorough. So the third thing was my conclusion that there isn't much value in trying to go through all 58 widgets and 16 extensions in one video, because all I'd end up doing is showing you that they exist, but you wouldn't get any sense of how easy or hard it was to use them or get any tips on using them in your projects. And that's why I've decided to focus on just the one extension, the token extension for dynamic data. So what is dynamic data? Dynamic data is information that's treated like a variable, as something where you can use a placeholder and fill in the value based on some rules. For example, if we look here at a list of posts, we can see that each individual title is static. It doesn't change. You don't usually change the post title. But when you look at the theme template, it treats the featured image, the title, and the content as a variable so that the same layout, the same typography and spacing and everything can be applied to all of the content of the same type. When you install dynamic content, it adds a menu here under the Elementor menu, and you have several tabs of options. The first tab here is for theme templates created with dynamic content for Elementor. You can specify them here if you've created some. The second tab lists all of the widgets, and you can turn on or off any that you're using or decide you don't want to use. And one advantage of turning off ones that you aren't using is that it might make the Elementor editor a little snappier. I know I've had several add-on packs installed and you end up with, 100 Elementor widgets and it's hard to find any. The third tab is for extensions. And the same thing, you can enable or disable the ones you're using or not using. And so we want to make sure that the token extension is enabled, and it is. The Documents tab has one feature here, scrolling, and the scrolling feature has a number of different views or skins or way of handling and showing scrolling. Then this is where you would enter your Google Maps API key, for instance, and this is where you would enter your license for the plugin. Now you'll notice here that I have dynamic content for Elementor installed, and I have Elementor installed, and I have Power Pack Elements installed, but I don't have Elementor Pro installed. Now dynamic content for Elementor works with free or Pro Elementor, and it works a little differently depending. Some features of Elementor, such as forms, are only available in Pro. So to use the form extensions of dynamic content, you would need to have Pro installed. So what does this extension do? To show you, let me switch over really quickly to a page on the Elementor 360 website where I do have Elementor Pro installed. And if we look at the widgets, when Elementor Pro is installed, we notice that it has this link here for dynamic content. Here for the title, here for the link, and lots of widgets have this dynamic content option. Let's go back here and just real quick we'll deactivate dynamic content. Let's go to a new page and look at the Elementor editor with only the free version of Elementor installed. And what you notice is that there are no links for dynamic content with the free version of Elementor. Okay, so let's go back and enable the plugin. So let's go to a new page and we'll look at it in the Elementor editor. These are the Elementor widgets. These are the dynamic widgets. And these are the PowerPack Elements widgets. So we would expect, if we look at one of the dynamic widgets, to see this dynamic data option. Remember, we've enabled the dynamic token feature of the plugin pack. So here is the dynamic data option in one of the widgets in the plugin pack. But let's look at a regular Elementor widget. This is Elementor free. And lo and behold, the dynamic content option is available here also. Remember, normally this is only available with Elementor Pro. And what the developers of the dynamic content for Elementor widget add-on pack realized is that this dynamic data is always available in WordPress. It's just that it's only turned on or shown with Elementor Pro. So with this extension, they turn it on for everybody all the time. So they have it in their widgets, and they've also turned it on for the Elementor widgets. And if we go back to the PowerPack widgets, we notice that there are dynamic content options there as well. So this is pretty powerful. It's not only enabled dynamic content for its own widgets and for Elementor free, but also for third-party add-on packs. So I was impressed by that. So I put together here a page that has some examples. And basically what I did was I spent several hours experimenting, looking at the documentation for the token extension and Googling and looking at the PHP manual, and came up with one or two examples for each of the different types of dynamic content here. And what I'm going to do is run through some of these examples here, and as I'm doing it, I think it'll give you a feel for using this feature. So most of these I've just done by adding a text field, going into the dynamic option, and when you do that, you get something here for a wizard mode, which is pretty nice, and we'll look at that. You get this thing here where it says dynamic again. Now you can see we're already in dynamic, and we get this again. I've seen this with Elementor Pro, that sometimes when you click on the dynamic option, this dynamic link shows again, but this is actually not usable. If you click on it, it's just going to close this dialog, so it doesn't help you. And then here is a text box where you can type in the tokens yourself manually. And looking at the hints here, you can see it looks a lot like a shortcode. You've got the square brackets, and then this first one is post : title, which we would assume would show the title of the current post. And on the website for the plugin, they have a documentation page that talks about the syntax for putting together the token. It has several parts. You start with the type of dynamic data, add a colon usually, and then you have a field name and maybe a subfield or an ID or a filter. There's an option for some fallback text, some placeholder if what you were looking for isn't found, and then a closing tag. When you enable the wizard mode, You see the different kinds, the 7 different kinds of dynamic data available. There's the post, the user, the terms, which is categories and tags or your custom terms. Options. Options is an interesting one. When you go into the admin settings pages, well, this gives you access to those setting options that you create there. The WP query object is returned for every page. It's information gotten from the database. And then some date variables here and some system variables. You can click on one of these, and it's useful and helpful is that there is some type ahead help if you know what you need. But as you can see there, what shows up in the type ahead help kind of varies a little bit. Like here is a variable from my theme, the WordPress page builder theme. And so the variables that are going to be available, some of them are standard WordPress and some of them are going to depend on the way you've set up your site. Okay, so I think on this one I did title, and here you can see it rendered the page title. And there's an option here to show the token code. And I'd use this sometimes I'd play around here and get an idea what I want, and then I'd use this syntax here to type it in manually. Like that. That was the post object. Let's take a quick look at the user object. So here are some user variables. And what you type in here, like you notice that jump up there, that's a little weird oddness. So let's try, I think my example was display name. So user display name. Let's turn that off, and there's my name. Now, one kind of interesting thing here is it was talking about you can add an ID. So let's type this in manually. And you can add a bar here and type in the user ID. I'm the only user on this site, so my ID is 1. And that also would get my name. So you can see that you would use maybe the post variables if you were creating templates for like theme templates. You might use the user variables if you have a membership site or creating some kind of profile page. Then you have terms, which are the categories and tags. Now this is a page. I don't think any terms are going to show there. So let's take a quick break here and save this. And let's go back to the dashboard. These are pages. We want to look at a post. Let's take a look here in Elementor. And this is my dynamic token here. See, it's term name, and I don't have any categories defined, so WordPress automatically categorizes it as uncategorized. So that's showing up here because posts have categories. Pages, I don't think, have categories by default. So let's go back to our page. And one thing that you might notice sometimes is that some things, for example, if it's not defined, like we're on a page, you can see I use this option for fallback default. So if no term is defined, it's going to output no term assigned. So that's a good example of when you would see that. See, here's the code there. And nothing's showing up here because when you're actually viewing this page in the editor, WordPress is not outputting any terms. So the whole variable doesn't exist here, and this is what's output. Next we come to some options, and so the default WordPress avatar, if an avatar isn't defined, is the mystery person. And this is another variable that I created, which was option blog name, which is the site title. So this is an example of those. If you want to look at these here in the wizard mode, sometimes typing in here will show you a list of everything and sometimes it doesn't. You can see there are tons of options here, right? Cron jobs, date formats, default role, right? Lots of options set in WordPress. Mail server login and whatnot. And you can pick one here. Now, I had trouble. I tried a couple of times to output the image from here, like into an image tag. Didn't have much luck with that, so it is a little trial and error. If we can find one here, what does that give us? Okay, there's the URL to the site. So when you're creating some kind of, application type of site, this kind of thing might be interesting. If you're building up a URL dynamically, you don't want to hard code the site URL in. So there's an example of that. Let's go back up here now. And the query examples. When I was playing around here and in the wizard mode, as I said, the posts and users, and even tags to some extent, these were fairly easy to use, and options was a little bit hit or miss. I mean, it was easy to find, when I found a good one, it was easy to use. But the WP query one, I had trouble getting much useful information out of that. I think maybe if there were some more examples in their documentation of getting information out of an array, or if I knew how to do that in this situation, that I might have had more success. But for my example here, it was the WP query post count. So if we look at this example here, I did WP query post count. And then the advanced here, instead of putting it in with a question mark and the string, I added it here in the before add-on here. There's before and after. And you can see that reflected here. Then the date options were also fairly easy to use. I found the formatting. This is a lowercase l for the date format. I found that information in the PHP manual, or I think it's in the WordPress Codex also. But you see here in their examples, they have things like plus 1 week, minus 2 months, yesterday. So there is that example. And then the system variables is another interesting one. Let's look at that. And this could be pretty powerful. You notice you can get access to the get and post and server variables. So in maybe a page related to email marketing, it's not uncommon when you sign up for a newsletter, say, that the person's name or email might be passed on the URL in a get variable, or passed in a form field in a post variable. And so you can pull those out and display them. So that's pretty powerful. Here is my example. When you, let's save for just a second here. When you click preview, there is, you can't see it up there, but let's see if I can show it to you. This is the URL for the preview page. You notice that Elementor passes on the URL a variable called preview true. So in my example here, I'm getting the get variable, looking for preview, and have a fallback, default if it's not found, preview get variable not found. And then this example, I'm getting the server software version, which is Apache, and has OpenSSL and the PHP version. That's what's returned from that PHP variable. And let's look at the system again. Here's kind of an interesting thing that I noticed. Seemed to only happen in server case. See, it dumped all of this server information. I think this is maybe the environmental variables for Apache. And so this was useful for me when I was playing around here. But as you can see, there was quite a bit of trial and error when setting this up. And one last thing I wanted to show you is that when you use the dynamic content version of the text editor, they have their own version of the text editor, you can actually chain the tokens together. You know, hello token, nice username. You're using Elementor and the option Elementor version. They have a little information here. You can choose which HTML tag you're going to use. So this might be interesting, for instance, if you're creating a welcome message for a user, or you are creating your own version of the post meta and you want to format it specifically for some use case. So this one is a little bit more flexible than the default text editor because you can chain these tokens together. So I've looked only at the one extension, at the token extension. There's a lot more to look at, and I imagine that the token features are going to be most useful when creating content templates, when doing theming. I haven't really looked at that in this video. I'll have to do that in another one. Because the Dynamic Content for Elementor plugin adds the token option to Elementor free and third-party widgets, it means that you can use those widgets in your templates also. So that is a big expander. When you're creating your single templates in Elementor, you can use some of the other widgets that normally might not have dynamic data options. I had the feeling when using the tokens that this is programmer or at least power user territory. The functionality is very powerful, but you're going to have to go digging for advanced usage. Things beyond, say, the post, the user, or the terms. Maybe the settings. You're going to have to do some Googling and research perhaps to find the right variable names to use. The documentation on the website for the plugin is helpful, but it's not as extensive as it could be, and I ended up having lots of questions. And I'd say of all of the different variable dynamic data types, I had the most trouble with the WP query object of getting useful information from that. The token functionality is pretty cool, but there are a few minor interface issues like I showed you where it jumped one time to the top. It's not like a huge deal, but it's kind of an oddity. You know, it's something to note that maybe there are a couple of rough edges. But I'm a gearhead and I like playing with dynamic data, so I enjoy taking a look at the token features and can see that the other widgets in the plugin pack are going to make use of this dynamic token, dynamic data feature. That's one of the ways that the widgets in this pack are going to get their flexibility and power is by making use of the tokens. So even though I kind of focused down on just this one extension, I think that for me, understanding how that worked is going to help me use the other widgets and extensions in the add-on. As I said, I'm planning to try my hand at creating content templates using the templating feature of dynamic content. So that's my walkthrough and look at this feature. I hope you found it interesting. Please take a look at some of the other tutorials and walkthroughs and reviews on the Elementor 360 website. Thank you for watching.